She didn't move when the others broke formation. Not a step back, not even a glance over her shoulder. Why? Because retreat wasn't in her blood. It was the one thing she swore she would never give them, the image of her back turned, her weapon lowered, her spirit bent. The enemy expected fear, they expected compliance, they expected her to run. But she stood there silent, a figure carved into the dust and smoke, her rifle angled but steady, her breath slow against the chaos. They didn't know who she was, not yet. The sun had dropped low, bleeding orange across the ridge. Dust clung to the edges of her uniform, to the faded patch stitched just above her heart. That patch wasn't regulation. It wasn't even supposed to be there. She wore it anyway, the way some people carry scars, quietly, defiantly, like proof they survived something no one else had the right to question. Her squad had pulled back to cover. Even the captain's voice crackled in her earpiece, ordering her to fall back. She didn't answer. Because orders couldn't touch the war inside her. What none of them knew, what she never said, was that this ground meant something. That valley below, those ruined walls, even the scorched metal of the burned-out truck where she now leaned her rifle, it all belonged to a memory only she carried. And memory can be heavier than any pack. The air buzzed with static, with waiting. The enemy didn't fire yet. Maybe they were confused, maybe they thought she was a decoy. A single soldier refusing to move, it didn't make sense to them. But war isn't built on sense. It's built on what you're willing to carry. Her finger rested near the trigger, not tight, not careless, just waiting. She thought about her father then, about the stories he used to tell, sitting on the porch when summer nights stretched long and the crickets sang louder than the silence in their home. Courage, he once told her, isn't about charging forward. It's about staying when you have every reason to leave. She never forgot that. And now, standing alone on the ridge, she wasn't thinking about medals or the flag or even survival. She was thinking about the one truth he left her with: courage is quiet. Her calm crackled again, someone cursed. Another voice begged her to move. She tuned it out, eyes fixed on the horizon. The first shot came sharp, echoing across the valley like a snapped bone. It kicked dirt inches from her boots. The enemy was testing her, warning her. She didn't flinch. Inside, yes, her heart slammed hard enough to hurt, but outside she was stone. And sometimes stone is the loudest answer you can give. She adjusted her stance, lifted her weapon a fraction higher, a long inhale, the metallic taste of dust and fear coating her tongue. Her squad couldn't see her face, but if they had, they would have read it plain: defiance laced with fire. That was when the second shot came, closer. She raised her rifle. And the world, for a moment, narrowed to the glass of her scope, the rhythm of her pulse, and the question she didn't know if she could answer. How long could she hold this ground, alone? She didn't ask for backup. She didn't call out. She just pressed her cheek tighter against the stock, eyes sharp, waiting for the shadow to reveal itself in the ruins below. But beneath the discipline, beneath the calm, another voice whispered, a quieter one. What if this was it? What if her defiance ended here, in the dirt, in silence, remembered by no one? Would her father call it courage then, or foolishness? Her hands tightened on the rifle. She swallowed hard. She didn't know. But she knew one thing: running wasn't an option, not anymore. Not after what this ground had taken from her. Not after who? The valley fell silent after the second shot. Too silent. She kept her eye to the scope, scanning shadows. A broken wall, the shell of a truck, a torn sheet caught in the wind, fluttering like a flag of surrender that no one intended to raise. Nothing moved, nothing dared. So why did it feel like eyes were all over her? Her squad was whispering over comms, urgent voices, frustrated ones. They couldn't understand why she was still out there, exposed, breaking every rule drilled into them. But rules don't bury your dead. Rules don't tell you how to breathe when you kneel at a grave with no body beneath it. Her throat tightened. She blinked against the dust, against the sting in her eyes that had nothing to do with wind. Somewhere down there, beneath those ruins behind that ridge, was the last place she saw him. She never told the others. Not once in all the months they trained, not through the endless patrols and firestorms. She kept it buried because grief in uniform is dangerous. It makes you reckless, makes you hesitate, and hesitation is death. But she wasn't hesitating now. She was remembering. Her father had stood here. Different year, different mission. He didn't come home, and the official reports, the cold paragraphs typed by men who never felt the dirt under their nails, called it uncertain circumstances. Uncertain. That word haunted her more than any bullet. Because uncertain meant his story ended without truth. And so she came here, carrying the weight no one else could see. Carrying the promise she made the night they folded the flag and handed it to her trembling hands. I'll find what they buried. I'll stand where you fell, and I won't move. Not until something gave her the answer. Her radio hissed. Fall back, that's an order. The captain's voice again, strained, sharp. She could almost picture him, teeth clenched, hand gripping the comm too tight. He was a good man, steady. But he didn't know this ground. He didn't know her ground. Her silence stretched long enough that the line went dead again. Then movement. Barely a flicker, a glint in the shadows. Her breath caught. She adjusted, fingers brushing the trigger, every muscle a wire pulled taut. But before she fired, before instinct took her fully, something strange happened. She saw his face. Not her father's, not the enemy. A boy. Barely older than the recruits she'd watched stumble through training camps, boots too big, eyes too wide. A boy with a rifle that looked heavier than his arms could manage. He froze when her scope found him. She froze too. Time broke open in that moment. He was shaking, terrified, and she knew he hadn't fired the first shots. He hadn't been the one testing her resolve. He was just another body thrown into a war that didn't care about names. For a heartbeat, she saw herself. The girl who joined the service because silence at home was worse than the danger outside. The girl who thought uniforms would shield her from grief. The girl who learned quickly that uniforms only make you easier to see. Her finger hovered. A whisper in her head, is this courage or cruelty? She lowered the rifle just slightly, enough that her breath came back to her. But lowering wasn't surrender, it was choice. The boy darted back into the ruins, vanishing like smoke. Her jaw tightened, her chest ached. And in that silence, something deeper stirred, a realization she wasn't ready to name. Because the enemy wasn't always the one across the valley. Sometimes it was inside. Sometimes it wore your face, whispering doubt into your ear when you needed fire instead. She closed her eyes for half a second, grounding herself. When she opened them, the ridge looked different, not safer, not clearer, just different. Like the valley had decided to breathe with her. Her squad was still waiting. Their faith in her had cracks. She could hear it in the tremors of their voices when they called again. Talk to us, what do you see? She didn't answer the question, not directly. Instead she said, quietly steady, hold your ground, they're waiting for us to break. The silence that followed told her everything, confusion, frustration, maybe even fear. But they obeyed, because sometimes tone speaks louder than rank. And in her tone, they heard something unshakable. She stayed low, scanning again, every sense sharpened, every nerve alive. Then came the sound. Not gunfire, not footsteps. A thud, metallic, distant but not too distant. Her chest tightened, she knew that sound. Mortar tubes. The valley wasn't just a battlefield, it was a trap. Her pulse kicked into a sprint. She switched channels, voice sharper now. They're setting up for indirect, spread now. No hesitation from the squad this time. Movement erupted in her ear, boots pounding, gear shifting, voices cutting short. She stayed put, because something in that metallic rhythm pulled her back into memory. Her father's last transmission, cut short, the garbled report of explosions no one claimed to hear, the blank lines in the after-action notes where there should have been details. Mortars. She swallowed hard. This wasn't just coincidence, this was pattern. The hair on her arms prickled, a chill slipping down her spine despite the heat. She knew in her bones this was the same valley, the same method, the same silence where truth should have been. Her father hadn't been lost, he'd been erased. And now she stood in the very echo of it. The ground under her boots felt heavier, sacred, dangerous. Her calm came alive again, someone shouting her name, panic edging their words, but she barely heard. Because beneath the thunder of memory and the rising fear, a vow crystallized. She would not retreat, not now, not when the valley whispered the truth so close she could almost touch it. She raised her weapon again, steadier this time. And for the first time since she arrived, she wasn't afraid of what waited in the shadows. She was ready for it. The first shell hit before anyone had the chance to breathe. A shriek through the air, the kind that makes your teeth ache before the explosion even arrives. Then impact, earth tearing itself apart, a column of dirt and fire erupting less than 50 meters from where she stood. The ground bucked under her boots, dust slammed into her lungs, the shockwave rippled through her ribs like a hand trying to crush her chest. She didn't move. Around her the squad scattered to cover, voices breaking into static and shouting. Someone screamed, a sharp, raw sound that made her flinch harder than the explosion itself. Her hand clenched on her rifle, knuckles white, eyes narrowed against the haze. Not again, she thought, not the same way. She adjusted position, crouching lower, using the burned-out truck as partial cover. Another whistle split the sky. Another impact closer this time. Shrapnel hissed through the air like angry bees. Something hot seared past her cheek. She ignored it. Her radio buzzed with chaos. The captain trying to regroup them. A medic shouting for location. Someone cursing that they couldn't see through the smoke. She stayed silent, scanning through the scope, searching for the glint, the silhouette, the telltale arc of another tube being adjusted. And then she saw him. Half hidden in the rubble below, a man with practiced movements, steady hands on the mortar tube, another fighter feeding rounds. Not boys, not recruits, trained, calm in the chaos. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Because it wasn't random. It was coordinated. The same pattern, the same precision she'd read about in that sterile report, the one they filed after her father's last mission. Uncertain circumstances. Her throat tightened, vision swimming. She blinked hard until the scope cleared again. The man bent, readying the next shell. She exhaled slow, finger pressing, the weight of choice boiling down to a breath. The shot cracked through the valley. The mortar operator dropped, body folding like paper. The loader froze, panic splashed across his face, then scrambled away into the ruins. For a second, silence. Then her squad erupted in her ear, cheers, disbelief. Someone shouting her name with a mix of relief and awe. She didn't answer, because inside there was no victory. Only confirmation. Her father hadn't been caught in crossfire. He'd been targeted, ambushed by men who knew exactly what they were doing. And now she knew it, standing on the very soil that had swallowed him. Her chest felt heavy. Her grip on the rifle trembled not from fear, but from the flood of something sharper. Rage, grief, the kind that burns hotter because it's been buried too long. She forced herself to inhale, slow, steady, just like he taught her. To breathe through the fire, not let it own her. But she couldn't bury the thought that clawed its way in. If I keep standing here, am I honoring him or chasing ghosts? The comms crackled, pulling her back. Move, damn it, they'll bracket us in, the captain barked, his voice ragged with urgency. He wasn't wrong. Mortar teams never worked alone. There be spotters covering fire, maybe even reinforcements sweeping in from the flank. Her instinct screamed to stay, to hold, to dig truth out of the dirt with her bare hands if she had to. But instinct isn't the same as survival, and survival was the only way she'd ever get answers. She shifted back, finally breaking from her frozen stance. Gravel crunched beneath her boots as she moved low, darting from one half-collapsed wall to another. Her squad spotted her through the haze. Relief poured into their voices, even as gunfire erupted again from the ridges beyond. Cover her, move, move. Bullets chewed through the dirt, snapping overhead. She dropped, pressed close to the earth, heart hammering against stone. And in that heartbeat, she felt it again, that pull between duty and obsession. One path was survival, following the squad, blending into their fight. The other was truth, hidden somewhere in the valley that kept whispering his name. The choice sat heavy in her chest. She pushed up, running hard toward cover, rifle tight to her chest. The medic grabbed her arm as she slid in beside them, eyes wide with both anger and relief. "You trying to get yourself killed?" he shouted over the chaos. Her gaze met his. For a moment she almost said it, the truth, the vow, the reason she wouldn't back down. But the words stuck, because saying it would make it real, would make her grief visible. And grief was a weakness no one forgave in war. So she only shook her head, pulling free, reloading with sharp, practiced movements. The squad regrouped. The captain laid out orders, terse and quick, voice steady despite the firestorm. They'd push toward higher ground, flank the mortar position, cut off escape. She nodded with the rest, but inside she was somewhere else. Back on the porch again, years ago, her father leaning back in his chair, the night thick with silence between his words. "You'll see things you won't understand," he told her once. "And the hardest part isn't surviving them, it's carrying them." She never asked what he meant. Maybe she was too young, too proud, too certain she'd never need to hear it. But now, crouched in dirt that still smelled of fire, she understood. The burden wasn't the bullet, it was the silence that followed. Her squad surged forward, moving in tight formation, each one a piece of the fragile whole. She followed, steps sure, heart split. Because every corner they turned, every ruin they passed, she half expected to see him. Not as a ghost, but as the man he was, walking ahead, steady, certain, unbroken. And each time she didn't, the ache cut deeper. Gunfire erupted again, close and sharp. The squad dropped, returning fire in controlled bursts. Shouts filled the air, the clash of battle swallowing thought. She raised her rifle, fired clean, watched an enemy fall. Another appeared, darting across rubble, and she tracked them with breathless precision. It was all motion, all reflex, training wired into her bones. But beneath it all, her mind kept circling one truth. This valley wasn't random. This mission wasn't chance. Something here tied past to present, and if she walked away without unraveling it, she'd lose more than a battle. She'd lose herself. The ridge loomed above them like a wall of shadow. Every step closer, every breath drawn through grit and fire felt heavier. The squad moved in staggered bursts, one group laying fire while the other advanced. Boots pounding, shells clattering, orders cut short by gunfire. But in her head it was quieter. Not silence exactly, more like a low hum, a current pulling her deeper into memory with every yard gained. Because this was it, she knew it in her bones. The ground they fought over wasn't just tactical, it was historical, personal, a scar pressed into the earth itself. The captain crouched beside her as they caught cover behind a fractured wall, his jaw tight, eyes sharp. "We push another 50 meters, they'll break. You with us?" It wasn't really a question, it was a warning. She nodded once, her voice when it came was steady, "I'm here." But here meant something different for her than it did for them. Gunfire cracked overhead, shards of stone raining down. She leaned out, fired 2 shots, clean and precise, dropping a figure in the ruins above. The recoil pressed into her shoulder, familiar, grounding. The medic muttered a prayer under his breath. Not loud, not for anyone else to hear, just enough to remind himself he was human. She glanced at him, catching the tremor in his hands as he reloaded. For a moment she wanted to tell him it was okay to be afraid. That fear didn't mean weakness. It meant you still cared about living. But the words stuck, because saying them out loud would mean admitting she felt it too. Another push, another advance. They reached the ridge's base. Smoke curled from the ruins above, mingling with the acrid stench of spent rounds and blood. The captain signaled. 2 would flank left, 2 right. She was with him at center, straight into the teeth of it. Her chest ached, not from exertion, but from the weight pressing harder with each second. What if the truth I find isn't one I can live with? The memory came unbidden, her father's voice, softer this time, the kind of tone he only used once the house was asleep. If they ever lie about me, don't waste your life proving them wrong. Just live better. But she hadn't listened, couldn't. Because some lies rot deeper than silence. The captain's hand tapped her shoulder, breaking the thought. On me. She nodded, and they surged forward together. The ridge exploded in noise. Bullets carving the air, grenades shattering stone, screams ripping through the chaos. She dropped low, rolled into a shattered doorway, rifle snapping up. Her first shot dropped a fighter mid-sprint, his body crumpling against the wall. The second carved through a window slit, silencing another muzzle flash. She moved like shadow, breath controlled, eyes scanning, ears tuned to every ricochet and cry. But then, between bursts of fire, she heard it. A voice. Not in English, not even words she fully understood, but the rhythm, the urgency, the clipped orders, it was familiar, too familiar. Her stomach turned to ice. Because months ago in the archives, she'd read fragments of an intercepted communication, a report buried so deep it took her weeks to find. The cadence was the same. The dialect, the urgency, it matched. Her father's last transmission hadn't been lost. It had been ignored. And the men who killed him, they were here. The realization made her chest tighten, rage flooding through veins already hot with adrenaline. But rage is a dangerous weapon. It blinds as much as it fuels. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her rifle, forcing focus back into her grip. One shot, then another. Enemies dropped, the squad pressed forward. The captain shouted over comms, voice ragged but fierce. "We've got them running." And it was true. Shadows scattered, gunfire thinned. The ridge, once a fortress of sound, grew quieter. But she didn't chase. Because her eyes had locked on something else, half buried beneath the rubble of a collapsed wall. A piece of fabric. Sun-bleached, torn, but the color, the insignia her breath caught. She knew it. Not standard issue, not anymore. Her father's unit wore it, years ago, before patches changed, before names faded. Her legs felt weak. The battlefield around her blurred, muffled, as if the world itself dulled to let this single truth echo. He had fallen here, exactly here. And now, standing in his shadow, she wasn't sure whether to scream, or collapse, or press the grief so deep it couldn't be seen. The medic's hand gripped her arm suddenly, dragging her back to cover. "What the hell are you doing? You'll get yourself killed staring at the dirt." She yanked free, her voice low, tight. "It's not just dirt." His eyes widened at her tone, but before he could question it, the captain's voice cut in. "Regroup, sweep the ridge. No one leaves until it's clear." She forced herself to move, to shoulder her weapon, to fall back into rhythm. But inside, nothing was steady. Because for the first time, the truth wasn't a question. It was a wound, ripped open and raw. Her father hadn't been forgotten. He'd been buried. Not by earth, by silence. The squad pressed higher, clearing rooms, corners, shattered stairwells. Every inch gained felt like borrowed breath. And still she carried that scrap of fabric in her palm, hidden from their eyes, a secret relic, proof that ghosts leave traces. When the last shots faded, when the ridge fell quiet, the captain finally exhaled, shoulders dropping. Secure for now. Relief rippled through the squad, small smiles, shaky laughter. The medic muttered another prayer, this one sounding more like gratitude than fear. But she didn't smile. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, where smoke curled into a sky that couldn't care less. And the thought that whispered through her chest wasn't relief. It was a vow, sharper now than ever. This isn't over, not until I know why they let him die here. Her hand closed around the fabric. She didn't realize she was trembling until her rifle slipped slightly in her grip. And for the first time since she raised her weapon hours ago, she wondered if the fire keeping her standing was the same fire that might one day consume her. Night crept over the ridge slow and heavy. The kind of night that pressed on your lungs, thick with smoke and old blood, the stars hidden behind a haze that refused to lift. They made camp inside the ruins. No fires, just red lamps and whispers. The medic worked quietly, patching cuts, checking bandages, murmuring small reassurances he didn't believe himself. The captain walked the perimeter, eyes sharp, shoulders refusing to drop. She sat apart, back pressed to a cold wall, rifle across her knees, the fabric clenched in her fist so tight her knuckles burned. She hadn't let it go, not once. Every so often she opened her palm just to stare at it again. Torn, faded, but real proof. And with each glance, the weight in her chest grew heavier. Not grief exactly, not yet. Something stranger, something rawer, like standing at the edge of a cliff knowing one step forward meant you never come back the same. Her calm was quiet now. No orders, no chatter, just the small human sounds of a squad too tired to pretend they weren't afraid. Across the room, one of the younger soldiers sat hunched, helmet off, hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. His face was pale under the red lamp glow. She recognized the look, not shock exactly, more like the sudden awareness that you're still alive when a few hours ago you shouldn't be. He caught her watching, forced a shaky grin. Hell of a day, huh? She didn't smile back, only nodded once. The grin faltered. He looked down at the cigarette, exhaled smoke that curled thin and desperate. I thought, when the first shells hit, I thought that was it. His voice cracked on the last word. He looked away quickly, ashamed of it. Something in her chest softened. Because beneath the uniform, beneath the bravado, he was just a boy. Barely older than the one she'd seen through her scope earlier, trembling in the ruins. And for a fleeting second the lines blurred: enemy, ally, father, son. All human, all breakable. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt like fragile things too easy to shatter. So she only said low, steady, "You held." His eyes flicked up, surprise breaking through the fear. Then a small nod, as if her words were a bandage stronger than the medic's stitches. The captain entered then, boots crunching over debris. His gaze swept the room, measuring, weighing, always calculating. "Rest while you can," he said, voice flat but tired. "We move at first light. Command wants us south." Groans rippled. The medic muttered something about exhaustion. Someone else cursed under their breath. She stayed silent. Because south meant away, away from the ridge, away from the truth clawing its way out of the dirt. Her pulse quickened, her grip on the fabric tightened. She couldn't leave, not yet. Not without answers. But how do you explain that to men who only see the war in front of them, not the war buried beneath it? Her father's voice echoed again, soft in memory. "If they lie about me, don't waste your life proving them wrong." She almost laughed, bitter and low, too late for that. The night deepened. One by one the squad drifted into uneasy sleep, snoring soft. Shifts rotated at the perimeter. The medic leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, lips still moving with silent prayers. She stayed awake, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the ruined doorway, on the valley that stretched silent and still under the weight of memory. And she thought about the boy in the scope, his shaking hands, his fear. Was he still out there? Was he someone's son, someone's brother, someone carrying a story like hers? Or would he be another body buried under silence by morning? The thought made her chest ache. Because maybe this wasn't just about her father anymore. Maybe it was about all of them, the forgotten, the erased, the nameless lives written off as uncertain circumstances. She closed her eyes just for a moment. But sleep didn't come. Only the memory of that day years ago when the knock came at the door and the officer stood stiff in his dress uniform, words rehearsed, eyes blank. "Regret to inform you." Her mother's scream had cut sharper than any bullet. And she hadn't cried, not then, not for months. Because part of her refused to believe it. And standing on that ridge today, holding proof in her hand, she wondered if maybe she'd been right. Maybe death wasn't the end, maybe silence was. Her eyes opened. The stars had finally broken through the haze, sharp and cold against the night. She whispered to herself, so quiet no one else could hear, "I won't let them bury him again." The vow felt heavier spoken, heavier but real. And in that weight she found a strange calm. Because sometimes resolve is the only thing that lets you breathe. She leaned her head back against the wall, rifle still across her knees, fabric still clenched in her hand. And though she didn't sleep, she rested. For morning would come soon. And with it the choice, follow orders or follow truth. Dawn arrived gray, reluctant, as if even the sun didn't want to rise on ground soaked in yesterday's blood. The squad moved in silence, boots over gravel, packs tightened, weapons checked by muscle memory. The air was cold, but the kind of cold that seeped under skin and sat in the bones. She walked with them, rifle slung, eyes forward, steps measured. To anyone watching, she was just another soldier keeping pace. But inside, every step southward felt like betrayal. The fabric burned in her pocket like a brand, proof, anchor, oath. She shouldered the weight of it, but the farther they marched, the heavier it grew, until the silence pressed too thick in her chest to hold. The captain walked ahead, gaze locked on the horizon. She quickened pace until she was beside him. "Sir." His eyes flicked toward her just a fraction. "Save it." "It can't wait." He sighed, jaw tight. "You've been restless since the ridge. I don't need distractions right now." Her hand went to the pocket, fingers brushing the worn edge. She pulled it free, held it out. The captain slowed. His eyes locked on the fabric. For a long moment the mask slipped, something like recognition flickered there. Then it was gone, smothered under command steel. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, voice low. She met his gaze. "Buried under the ridge, half torn, half buried, it's his." The words cracked at the end, but she didn't care. The captain's face hardened. "That's impossible." "You know it's not." A muscle in his jaw twitched. He looked away, scanning the squad ahead, making sure no ears were turned back. Then he leaned close. "Listen to me," he said. "Whatever you think you found, it doesn't matter. Not out here, not now." Her throat tightened. "It matters to me." "Then keep it to yourself." His voice sharpened. "You start dragging ghosts into this, you'll get men killed. Do you want that weight?" She wanted to scream, to shout that the weight was already hers, had been since the day the officer came to the door. Instead, she shoved the fabric back into her pocket, fingers trembling. He straightened, pulling distance back into his posture. "South," he said firmly, as if it were the only truth that mattered. And just like that, he was gone again, walking ahead, leaving her trailing behind with fire boiling under her skin. The squad moved for hours, through ruined villages, over broken roads, past fields where silence clung like a second skin. Every step, the fabric pressed against her thigh, reminding her. By noon, exhaustion weighed them down. The medic's limp slowed the pace. The boy with the cigarette coughed harshly, chest tight. The squad's strength was unraveling thread by thread. The captain finally called a halt. They slipped into the cover of a ruined barn, shadows deep, walls half collapsed. Rations came out, water passed around, no one spoke much. She sat in the corner, back against wood splintered by shrapnel, hands restless, mind louder than the silence. The captain was speaking with the sergeant, heads bent low. She caught fragments, extraction point, 2 days march, reinforcements. Her jaw clenched, 2 days south, 2 days further from the ridge, from answers. Her father's voice again, faint but steady. If they lie, the truth will still breathe under the dirt. And she knew. She couldn't wait 2 days, couldn't wait 2 hours. The ridge called her. It wasn't just obsession, it was something deeper, a tether, a compass. She looked around the squad, the medic with his quiet prayers, the boy staring blank at the floor, the sergeant worn thin but steady, the captain, a wall of orders and denial. Would any of them understand if she spoke it aloud? Would any of them follow if she turned back? Or would she walk that road alone? Her chest tightened. She thought of the boy she'd seen in her scope, hands trembling, fear written in his eyes. If he could stand his ground in the ruins, then so could she. Decision settled like iron. She would return, even if no one followed, even if it broke her. The squad settled into rest rotations. She pretended to close her eyes, pretended to slow her breathing, waited, listened. Until the barn was quiet, save for the soft rasp of sleep and the occasional cough. She rose soundless, movements trained and deliberate, pack on shoulders, rifle slung. Her hand brushed her pocket, feeling the fabric there. She turned toward the doorway, the pale light of afternoon spilling across dust. But as she stepped forward, "Where are you going?" The voice froze her. The boy, sitting against the wall, eyes heavy with exhaustion but open, watching. He didn't move, didn't raise alarm, just asked quiet. She hesitated. His eyes searched her face. "Back to the ridge, aren't you?" Her chest tightened. "I have to." He nodded slowly as if he'd known all along, then glanced at the sleeping squad. "If you leave, they'll say you deserted." "I know." He studied her a long moment, then softly, "Take me with you." Her breath caught. He looked small, even in the uniform, scared, but there was a stubborn fire there too. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," he faltered, then steadied. "If I stay, I'll keep shaking. If I go, maybe I won't." Something in her broke and healed at the same time. She gave a single nod. Together, silent as shadows, they slipped out of the barn. The field stretched empty before them. The ridge rose faint in the distance, a dark line against the fatting sky. Every step toward it felt like betrayal of orders, betrayal of squad. But every step also felt like coming home. And with each one, her father's voice echoed stronger. Not a ghost, not memory, but presence, guiding her back toward the truth waiting under the dirt. Night swallowed the fields as they moved, 2 shadows breaking away from the rest of the war. The boy's breathing was uneven, too fast, but he kept moving. She could hear the fear in him, but she also heard resolve, like a thread pulled taut, ready to snap but holding. Every step brought the ridge closer, and every step tightened the noose. She paused often, crouching low, scanning the horizon. The ruins ahead sat black against the stars, jagged shapes clawing upward. The silence was too deep, not empty, waiting. The boy shifted beside her, whisper quiet, "What if they're still there?" Her eyes stayed forward. "Then we move quieter." He nodded, though his hand trembled as it rested on his rifle. She remembered her own first patrol years ago, how the weapon felt heavier than bone, how her breath shook in the stillness. She hadn't had anyone to steady her then. Now, without thinking, she reached out and pressed a hand to his shoulder, firm, anchoring. His breathing slowed. Together they moved again. The ridge loomed closer, details sharpening, the twisted metal of the burned truck, the broken wall splintered by mortars, the ground that still smelled faintly of smoke. Her chest tightened. She had walked away from it once. Coming back now felt like peeling open a wound. At the base of the ridge, she crouched low, gesturing for the boy to stay behind the wall. He obeyed, eyes wide, jaw clenched. She inched forward alone, belly close to dirt, scope rising. The ruins slept under moonlight, silent, but silence could lie. She scanned every shadow, every angle. Nothing moved. No flash of metal, no silhouette against stone. She exhaled slow, a release she hadn't realized she was holding. The boy crawled closer, clear. She gave a slight nod. They climbed together, boots careful over loose rock. The higher they rose, the stronger the memories pressed. Her father's voice, the fabric in her pocket, the men who'd fallen here, unnamed and unspoken. At the crest, she stopped. The ground spread wide before them, broken and scarred. She dropped to one knee, fingers tracing the dirt. This was the place. She could feel it like blood under skin. The boy hovered, uncertain. What are we looking for? She pulled the fabric from her pocket, laid it flat in the moonlight. The torn edges, the faint mark of rank. Her throat tightened. Proof, she whispered. He frowned. Proof of what? She didn't answer, not yet. Instead, she began digging, hands clawing into dirt, pulling stones aside. Each scrape of earth felt like tearing at her own chest. The boy knelt beside her, silent, helping. Minutes bled into an hour. Their hands grew raw, nails packed with grit, sweat freezing against skin. And then her fingers struck something hard. She froze. The boy's eyes locked on hers. She brushed more dirt away, heart hammering. Metal. A fragment of gear, rusted and scarred. Not new, not recent. Her breath caught. She dug faster, frantic, uncovering more. A buckle, a strap, the remnants of a pack crushed under weight of soil and time. And beneath it, bone. She stopped, chest heaving, vision blurring. The boy's face drained, pale. He swallowed hard but didn't look away. She lifted the fabric, matching it against what lay beneath. The torn edge fit like puzzle pieces long separated. Her body shook. Her father's voice, once strong in memory, now felt faint, distant. The boy whispered, almost reverent, "It's him, isn't it?" Her lips parted but no sound came, only a nod, trembling. She sat back, hands filthy, heart heavier than stone. The truth she had carried like fire was here, undeniable, cruel. The ridge hadn't lied. Her father had fallen here, abandoned, buried in silence. She closed her eyes, the weight pressed down, crushing, but beneath it something else stirred, not despair, not entirely. A strange, fierce calm. She had found him. She had brought light back to the place they had buried in shadow. The boy sat beside her, silent, respectful. For a long time they stayed there, two figures in the ruins keeping vigil. Then movement. A sound in the dark. She snapped up, rifle in hand, scanning. The boy followed suit, fear bright in his eyes. Voices, distant but drawing closer, foreign, harsh, echoing through stone. Her stomach dropped, enemy. They weren't alone. She gestured, quick, sharp, down, quiet. They pressed flat against the ground, rifles clutched, breath held. Shadows flickered below, moving across the valley floor, armed, searching. Her mind raced. If they stayed, discovery was certain. If they ran, noise would betray them. The boy's eyes locked on hers, wide, pleading. Her pulse thundered. She thought of the squad marching south, blind to this. She thought of her father lying here alone for years until tonight. And she thought of the vow she had carried all this way, not to run, not to retreat. Her hand brushed the fabric again. Quiet defiance, fire. She raised her rifle. The boy's breath hitched. He whispered, shaking, "What do we do?" She steadied, eyes sharp, voice low but firm. "We hold." The boy's breath shook beside her, shallow, frantic. She could feel the tremor in him like static in the air. Below, shadows moved with purpose. The enemy swept in slow arcs, rifles ready, their boots crunching against stone. They hadn't spotted them yet, but it was only time. The ridge wasn't just ground anymore. It was a crucible. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, steady. The boy whispered, barely audible, "We can't fight all of them." Her eyes stayed fixed through the scope, her voice quiet but firm. "We don't need to fight all of them, just long enough." Long enough for what? She didn't answer. She didn't know. Maybe long enough for the squad to notice. Maybe long enough for truth to breathe before silence closed in again. Maybe long enough for him, the man beneath the dirt, to not be forgotten. Her cheek pressed to the stock. The cold metal steadied her. One breath, two, the world narrowed. Through the glass she caught movement. The lead figure breaking from the others, scanning, turning his weapon toward the ridge. Her chest tightened. Decision snapped into muscle memory. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through night, echoing like a blade against stone. The lead figure dropped. Chaos followed. Voices shouted, boots pounded, muzzle flashes erupted in the dark. The boy flinched, panic rising. She pressed a hand against his back, firm. "Stay low, breathe." He obeyed barely. Bullets tore the earth around them, stone splintering, dust choking the air. The ridge shook under the storm. But she held, calm, cold, each shot deliberate, each pull of the trigger an anchor against fear. One down, another stumbled. A third ducked behind cover. They pressed closer, spreading wide, surrounding. The boy fired two, wild at first, shaky, but then steadier. His jaw set, his eyes narrowed, not perfect, but present. Together they held. Minutes stretched, every second a lifetime. She reloaded, hands practiced even as sweat stung her eyes. The boy covered clumsily but with heart. For a moment, just a moment, it felt possible. But numbers crush resolve. Grenade, the hollow thud of it hitting earth. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed the boy, yanking him down into the dirt. The blast tore the ridge above them, showering rock and flame. Ears rang, world spun. Her body screamed, but she forced herself up, rifle clutched, vision swimming. The boy coughed, blood at his lip but alive. They were surrounded now, shapes closing in, dark against firelight. She knew. This was the end of holding. She looked at the boy, his eyes wide, scared but burning. He had followed her here when he didn't have to. She pressed the fabric into his hands, closing his fingers tight around it. His voice cracked, "Why?" Her gaze steadied on his, quiet, defiant. "Because someone has to remember." His throat bobbed, tears cutting through dirt on his face. Then she rose. Not retreating, not begging, rising. Her rifle leveled, her breath even. The enemy shouted, weapons raised, but for a heartbeat, everything slowed. She thought of her father, of the porch, of the summer nights when courage was just a word. Now it was breath, blood, choice. She fired again. And again. The boy shouted her name, voice breaking. The ridge lit with fire. When it ended, silence fell heavy. The boy lay pressed against the dirt, shaking, clutching the fabric to his chest. Smoke drifted, shadows moved no more. He crawled to her, hands trembling. Her rifle lay in the dirt beside her, still warm. Her eyes half closed, breath shallow. She looked at him once more, faint smile, almost peace. And then stillness. The boy wept, head bowed, clutching both her and the fabric. When the squad found them hours later, dawn breaking, they stopped in silence at the ridge. No words, Just the sight of two figures, one standing in spirit, one kneeling in grief. The captain's face was unreadable, but his hand rose in salute, slow and steady. The boy lifted the fabric, stained but whole, his voice cracked but carried. She held. And that was all. Because some truths don't need speeches. Some courage doesn't need recognition. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The wind rose over the ridge, carrying dust and silence, and somewhere within it her defiance remained, quiet, unbroken, eternal.